The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Idriss Deby Itno, President, Head of State and Head of the Government of the Republic of Chad. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Idriss Deby Itno, President, Head of State and Head of the Government of the Republic of Chad, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and heads of delegation, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of my delegation and also in my own capacity, I should like to offer my warmest congratulations to His Excellency Mr. Tijani Mohamed Bande, Permanent Representative of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to the United Nations, upon his brilliant election to the presidency of the 74th session of the General Assembly. I wish him every success in his mission and assure him of the support of the delegation of Chad throughout his mandate. I would also like to express our sincere thanks and congratulations to Her Excellency Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa, outgoing President of the General Assembly, for the excellent work done during her mandate and for the attention that she paid to the countries of the Lake Chad Basin, including my own, when she made a working visit there in May 2018. Allow me also to express my great appreciation and my support to His Excellency, the Secretary-General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his leadership and his commitment to reinvigorating the role of the UN to better respond to the vast expectations of all peoples through a strong involvement of regional organizations. In this respect, Chad welcomes the exemplary partnership which is developing between the United Nations and the African Union. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the theme chosen for this session of the General Assembly, galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action and inclusion, comes at an opportune moment to assess the progress made in implementing some of our commitments under the 2030 Agenda. I welcome the relevance of this theme. It both underscores the weakness of the efforts made in the face of our shared socio-economic and environmental challenges, and also demonstrates the urgent need for greater mobilization by the international community to implement the major sustainable development goals that were agreed under the 2030 Agenda. This includes the eradication of extreme poverty, access to good quality education, the fight against climate change, and the reduction of inequalities. We note with regret that the excitement in the air when the 2030 Agenda was adopted in September 2015 was not followed by far-reaching results compared to the commitments that were made. However, this agenda was a consensus document that reconciled the concerns and positions of all those involved. In the absence of robust action and the planned resources that are still lacking, our shared dream of building a stable and peaceful world where all of our peoples can prosper is currently giving way to fear and uncertainty. Because the question of poverty is closely linked to that of crises and conflicts, migration and climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, the elimination of extreme poverty takes pride of place among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted, and this demonstrates the fundamental importance of achieving this. The collective struggle that needs to be waged against poverty involves honouring the commitments that were made under this agenda and concrete actions that need to be taken. The resources to be mobilised to this end are easily within the reach of the international community, provided that it shows will and determination and solidarity. In this respect, the priorities and expectations of Africa that my country shares are well known. They are even enshrined in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for the Financing for Development. 4 years after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, the expected results are far from being delivered. The lack of progress on every front is more than concerning. At a time when our expectations in terms of development are more than pressing. How can we hope to combat poverty if the commitments made to that end under the Addis Ababa Action Agenda never become more than promises? It seems to me urgent that some of our chief concerns receive our collective attention, including on the subject of the industrialization that is vital for the transformation of our vast natural resources, the diversification of our economies, the fight against illicit capital flows that are draining significant resources from our countries, access to markets, the establishment of innovation funds to support the development and marketing phase of technologies, and also the reform of international financial institutions to take into account the effective participation of African countries in decisions that affect them. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the absence of tangible results compared to the commitments that were made also impacts the fight against climate change. And this in spite of the immense hope that was generated by the historic Paris Climate Agreement. The grave consequences of climate change are being felt in Africa more than anywhere else, and in particular in the Sahel, as is demonstrated by the advance of the desert, drought, the silting of bodies of water such as Lake Chad and the Niger River, accelerated deforestation, soil erosion, and so on. Through these harmful effects, climate change is also exacerbating crises and conflicts over natural resources. It is generating food insecurity, causing mass population exoduses, making access to basic social services more precarious, and accentuating poverty to the point of forcing young unemployed people into the arms of terrorist groups. In the face of this grave threat, Chad joins its voice with the voice of many other countries to reiterate its firm appeal for a substantial reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and for the bolstering of resilience to climate change. The Paris Climate Agreement is only credible if it is accompanied by tangible action to respect and honour the commitments that were taken by all parties according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. I would like to underscore the crushing need to honour the commitment that was made by developed countries to mobilise $100 billion a year by 2020 to meet the needs of developing countries for mitigation and adaptation. The full operationalisation of the Green Climate Fund is urgent in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, our children having access to good quality education is a tool that can be levered to combat poverty and climate change in the long term. Quality education is also a driver of knowledge and transformation in our societies. It goes without saying that it is the best guarantee for a better world. However, hundreds of millions of children around the world today do not have the opportunity to access even the most basic schooling. The primary causes making school inaccessible for these children continue to be underdevelopment, poverty, devastating conflicts, obscurantism, and so on. Despite an acute economic and financial crisis, that has drastically reduced our investments in vital sectors, Chad continues to pay particular attention to education by devoting 15 to 16% of its budget to education each year. Over the last 10 years, the number of pupils has skyrocketed. We plan to increase this rate of budget expenditure to 20% in the coming years. Faced with the scale of needs in the sector of education, the challenges that need to be overcome are immense, and the available resources are not sufficient. Hence, the pressing need for constant mobilization to act together in a momentum of solidarity and complementarity to support the least well-off countries who want to give a chance and an opportunity to all children around the world to access good quality education. Ladies and gentlemen, for almost a decade now, Africa has been in the grip of a growing swell of terrorism. The Sahel and the surrounding area is suffering the full force of the ravages of this great ill of the century that aggrieves our populations on a daily basis and which is undermining all of our development efforts. As much as we can, we are strongly mobilized, both within the joint multinational force of the countries of the Lake Chad Basin, as well as within the joint force of the G5 Sahel, to address the existential threat represented by terrorism. In this struggle against a blind and often invisible enemy that is becoming unexpectedly resilient, the enormous sacrifices made have not allowed us to vanquish this enemy. the states of the Sahel that are affected each year devote between 18 and 32% of their budget to this increasingly untenable security effort. This constant mobilization on the part of these states for several years now against terrorism cannot go ignored by the international community, whose support is vital if we are to win this fight. In this vein, and from this rostrum, I reiterate the appeal of the member states of the G5 Sahel to the members of the United Nations Security Council, asking them to ensure lasting financing for the G5 Sahel force from the United Nations regular budget through a mandate under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter. What's more, looking to the current pooling of efforts of the forces of the G5 Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin Commission and the states of ECOWAS, we underscore the need for greater, more adapted coordination of actions of all of the actors present in the Sahel, including international forces such as MINUSMA and Barkhane, and this while respecting the purpose of each entity. Chad stands ready to make its modest contribution to this coordination to wage a more effective struggle against terrorism. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I can't discuss terrorism and insecurity in the Sahel without talking also about the Libyan crisis that is having incalculable consequences on this region. In spite of laudable initiatives on the part of the international community aiming to bring an end to this serious crisis, which has lasted for far too long, the situation continues to be extremely worrying and also continues to take a dramatic turn. The efforts that have been made to help our Libyan brothers restore peace are being undermined by inter-Libyan armed confrontations that are aggravated by multiple external interference in many different forms. Resolving this crisis will involve the Libyan brothers themselves, collectively and individually, acknowledging the situation that they are in. They must understand that they are the primary masters and authors of their destiny, and that violence is not an option to resolve the crisis. In this war, there will be no winners and there will be no losers apart from one loser, which will be the Libyan people. We must all work with a view to a global, inclusive dialogue, bringing together all of the protagonists in this crisis. With this in mind, we call on all armed parties, including tribal chiefs and community chiefs, to participate in a national dialogue that will be a prelude to the holding of credible elections. As in the past, we continue to stand ready to support the efforts of the United Nations and the African Union to restore peace and stability to this country. Bringing peace and stability back to Libya will be a condition for the return of peace and stability to neighbouring countries and to the entire Sahel to a large extent. With this in mind, Chad calls for strong involvement by the African Union alongside the United Nations in pursuit of a lasting solution through a synergy of efforts. Whatever we may say, Libya has been and will continue to be an African country. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the question of UN reform, including reform of the Security Council, which Africa firmly calls for, at all sessions of the United Nations General Assembly, deserves our full attention. This legitimate claim cannot be diluted in the interminable negotiations that have lasted for years without any progress being made. Africa is asking for nothing other than reparation for a flagrant prejudice against an entire continent with more than 1 billion people that is unjustly deprived of its legitimate place in the United Nations system. I reiterate Chad's commitment to the common African position on Security Council reform. As expressed in the Esselwini Consensus, and a call for justice and solidarity of all nations to accelerate this reform that we have wished for so long and waited for so long. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, I would like to express Chad's solidarity and sympathy with all countries that are currently going through difficult situations due to crises, conflicts, or natural disasters. In this respect, Chad welcomes the momentum of dialogue and reconciliation that has been begun in the Central African Republic, the Sudan, and South Sudan, and calls on all stakeholders to work harder to achieve lasting peace in these respective brother countries. Therefore, Chad reiterates its position of principle on the Israeli-Arab conflict, calling on all parties to adhere to the two-state solutions, the solution of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace, in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the UN Security Council and the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002. Lastly, Chad reiterates its call for the lifting of the embargo unjustly imposed on Cuba, which severely prejudices and harms the people of this country. It is because we are committed to the founding principles of the UN, and because we believe in its ideals of peace, justice, sovereign equality between states and prosperity for all, that we come each year to this great meeting, the General Assembly. Let us ensure that the behavior of each member state be in line with the rules that we have set ourselves, so that peace, justice and solidarity may triumph around the world. Thank you for your kind attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency, President, Head of State and Head of Government of the Republic of Chad for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the Head of State.